Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today, my guest is Justin MacBale, a mergers and acquisitions specialist with deep expertise in post-merger integration, carve-outs, divestitures, and digital transformation. Justin has managed deals ranging from $200 million to $600 million and brings a structured, pragmatic approach to integration, balancing technology, people, business processes, and data. As the creator of the Global M&A Integration Network, Justin shares insights on maximizing deal value through disciplined execution. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Clint. Happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to have you. I've been in touch with you for a bit and watching your career, and you really do provide just a wealth of resources to folks that are part of your network on LinkedIn.
Appreciate that acknowledgement. I love to teach.
Yeah, well, fantastic. You do a great job of it. So, Justin, why don't you tell our listeners about your background and what got you involved in M&A, especially that post-merger integration phase?
So I have a really eclectic background, actually. I started in restaurants, and then I moved over into sales for direct store delivery. So like Frito-Lay, Nabisco, all of that. Pivoted into an MBA program. And during that time, I fell in love with M&A work. After that, I went into IT consulting for 5 years, got tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, with your program and project management experience, as well as your testing, we'd like to bring you on board to manage post-merger integrations. And I was like, great. I wanted to pivot into M&A anyway, so it just worked out. After that, I rescued a few projects, and now I've pivoted back to program management for IT consulting.
Fantastic. So I'm curious, how different do you see the post-merger integration process from digital transformation?
I don't see them as very different. There is a nuance, of course. There are some drivers in terms of pace and the level of scope and the ability to pivot. For digital transformations, they're driven by a timeline, a budget, executive direction. But in M&A, it's more event driven. So there are TSAs, there are macroeconomic features or drivers, if you will, that are determining how fast and how urgent the event needs to be closed.
That makes sense. I often tell people that M&A is a context. Right. We have our skills that we bring to the table, and those skills we can use in a lot of different contexts, and transformation is one of those. But when we talk about the context of M&A specifically, you have a really fantastic article out on LinkedIn that talks about 8 key stages of post-merger integration. And since post-merger integration is a bit of a mouthful for those who aren't familiar with the industry jargon, we often abbreviate that as PMI. So can you walk us through the 8 key stages of PMI and talk a bit about why you break it down that way?
Sure. So the first thing to note is these 8 stages, they're not like a hard and fast rule. You generally have them as stages within a digital transformation and M&A project. It starts with a strategic or setup component, followed by a strategic component, then planning, validation, and then into stabilization. So the first stage of all of this is governance. And that is getting the project set up, understanding the project charter, and identifying all of the key stakeholders and their roles and responsibilities. Afterwards, we get into strategy. That strategy divides into multiple different work streams depending on the scope of the merger or the M&A event. That is the people, the process, the technology, the data elements of the deal. And you have to build strategies around each of those particular work streams. And then we get into assessments. Those assessments are around planning as well as conducting any kind of surveys or gathering information in order to harness a more refined plan. Once you get into a refined plan, we then go into a little bit more detail around design itself. And that is the blueprint, that is the architecture, the to-be processes, the operating model, the communication plans, etc. And then we get into validation. That's the testing and the training components for all of the various different stakeholders. We then get into cutover basically being the transition for all of the data, the processes, the configurations, the systems, the integrations, etc. To get to go live. Once we get to go live, we have a time period where we are bridging that gap between the legacy application or the transition, making sure that it's all working correctly and addressing any issues and defects. And then we get to stabilization. That's where we're monitoring all of the KPIs, monitoring all of the system performances to make sure that the business has continuity and can stand on its own.
Fantastic. That's a lot of steps, but it follows a very, very logical flow. When we look at these 8 stages, are there parts of this that most companies do well or many companies do well and areas where companies flounder more than others?
Yeah, I would say that most companies do well in design and validation. That seems like their bread and butter. They're going to do what they said they're going to do based on the scope of their lens. However, when it comes to opportunities for growth, a lot of them lack a great governance structure that is around prioritization, that is around escalation processes and communications to pivot as new information develops, because M&A is not a vacuum. There are dotted line relationships, there are upstream and downstream impacts, and various different cross-functional teams that are all involved, whether inside the company, outside the company, or adjacent to the company, like suppliers, vendors, partners.
In the world of governance, as I think about what I'm hearing you say, I've worked on a lot of deals where the deal sponsor, for example, is asked to have somebody from their team step in and be the post-merger integration lead, for example, and doesn't necessarily have the toolkit to set up a good structure. They're sort of thrown into it. From a governance perspective, I mean, that's the foundation of this model that you're talking about. What are some of the things that those folks should do to ensure a good governance layers in place? Just thrown into a deal and, what should you do to get it set up?
A few things you can do. I'm not a fan of just getting thrown in and then saying, oh, I can't do it. You have your own personal research that you can do. There are plenty of resources online, excuse me, for figuring out what can be done as well as what should be done. There's also leaning on your partners that are far more experienced. Um, no, that can be your own personal network. And the third element is around just looking at it from a very logical perspective. You need to figure out what it is that's important for the deal for maintaining business continuity. The second is around making sure that everyone's on board from a planning perspective, and then validating that all of that design has been completed correctly. Once those structures are in place, we just have to get through the nitty gritty details, which are, hey, there's different time zones. Hey, there's different teams. Hey, there's stakeholders are from different walks of life, and you have to be able to communicate with different skill set.
Fantastic. So skipping ahead a couple of steps, you mentioned that assessment and design are areas where companies tend to do fairly well. So what are some of the muscles that they use that help them do that well, and how do they apply that into the M&A context?
So one of the most important things is to engage early. Once you have either a formal handoff from the deal generation phase to the PMI phase, or you have control of the PMI phase from an access perspective, because there's a lot of confidentiality in the due diligence phase. So you don't have as much access as you do in the PMI, but you get early you engage them early, and that's to figure out scheduling, that's to determine who needs to be a part of these meetings, as well as gain existing current state access. Those are usually around workflows, standard operating procedures, any kinds of data that exists from a volume metrics perspective. That's determining the historical data to determine pinpoint what are those important processes, the revenue pieces, the target customers, the locations, the demographics, the product lines, all of these pieces. Once you've engaged them early and you gain access, then it's just a matter of working through all of those details. And when you hold those meetings, they have to be structured. And the way to structure those meetings is based off of the objectives that you need to hit for that meeting, as well as at the end of the meeting, you need to keep asking the question, is there anyone else that we need to talk to? Is there anyone else that you have some sort of dotted line relationship from a data flow perspective, from a systems perspective, from a process perspective, and you're just kind of uncovering it like a detective. Those pieces, for the most part, a lot of companies are very familiar with because they have an advisory service that helps unlayer those pieces.
One of the things, Justin, I'm seeing out in the industry is this shift towards integration focused diligence. So moving away from simple focus on just the financials or just the legal risks and into really understanding what PMI might look like during the diligence phase. Are you seeing that trend? And if you are, what are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. So the shift left concept, if you will, where they're moving activities upstream into the due diligence phase is to help risk mitigation and figure out fit and potential watch-outs, if you will. The problem is that in the due diligence phase, you don't have as much access as you do in the post-merger because of the sensitivity and the people that are involved. So it's still a limited lens, but it's better than nothing. So you're going to have snapshots, pieces of information and data, but not the whole perspective. That's the limitation behind it, but it's not to discourage you. It's just to understand that it's a starting point.
Yeah, got it. And when you say access, can you talk just a little bit more about what you mean by access?
Yeah, so files, for the most part, they will give you samples. They won't give you the entire revenue or the entire profile of expenses, contracts. You get samples of those as well. And there are limited people that are involved in the due diligence phase from the business perspective. So you get mostly executives or trusted advisors from the business. You're not going to get the low level, the frontline employees or the middle managers for the most part. And those have the tribal knowledge that isn't going to reflect in the due diligence and the nuances that will really make or break your integration later down in the.
Makes a ton of sense. So you get some preliminary information during diligence that begins your assessment, and then it sounds like you continue the assessment once your deal is announced and you have that additional access.
But
fantastic.
That's all idealistic, right? In the real world, you're going to be struggling for about a week or two to get access because everyone's in a frenzy. M&A deals aren't exactly nice and clean.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of times when you walk in and let people know that their company's just been acquired that they're calm. It's
yeah. Yeah. No, really? Are you sure? I'm pretty sure I have a job after the end of this.
Right, exactly. So working through that emotionality can be really well, it can be really challenging. And I've been acquired a few times in my career. It's a blow to the ego, and I don't necessarily mean like my pride, but just there's a piece of identity that gets tied up in where we work. And do I have a job? Can I feed my kids? That sort of thing.
No, you hit the nail on the head, Casey. Casey. People will people, and everyone has their emotions. They have their rumor mill. And when there is ambiguity or the unknown, people will fill it with whatever they feel gives them some sort of understanding of the reality. And usually that's not a positive because people will focus on the fear or the opportunities for losses more than gain.
So as you're working with folks that are peopling, as our friend Casey, who's a change manager, I may now have to invite Casey to come join us. But
Absolutely.
so our friend Casey's a change manager who people are people, or people will people, excuse me, is the expression she uses. It's a great point. So while you're dealing with those emotions and reactions, you're also trying to assess and then design. How involved, Justin, do you like to get the folks on the sell side, these people that are, you've now got access to after the diligence phase into the design that you're doing for your post-merger integration?
So I actually caution that no design is of value unless it's vetted by the business. Just like in requirements gathering and digital transformations, you have to vet it by the business. It's inefficient. It's also ill-advised to design something and say, here you go, without any sort of feedback. Be like, no, wait, you forgot this piece. Oh, well, we didn't know about that piece. Or this process has an additional step that wasn't formally documented, and there's a workaround around that. And we want to make sure that in the new process, that opportunity isn't there anymore. And so feedback, just like in any other digital transformation, is critical at business alignment. Otherwise, you're going to find that people aren't going to adapt to it. People will circumvent it, and you're going to have this resistance, this friction towards the change that you can't overcome, which will increase your costs and reduce your deal value capture.
So it's not just about making the best possible plan. It's also about getting buy-in. So fast forwarding a couple of steps, you've designed after your assessment, and now you're to the point where you're starting to cut things over from the seller's way of doing things to the buyer's way of doing things, or the new way of doing things, something that maybe the buyer bought for a capability, but you got to figure out how to do it on both sides. What are the biggest risks that happen during that cutover, and how do you mitigate those?
So there are two main ones that I want to cover. The first one is around coordination. Cutover planning, cutover strategy needs to happen early and often. You need to have a piece where we're reviewing the cutover sequencing. These are the tasks that need to happen in the correct order in order for the business to have the correct data and systems in place for operations. So the second piece is around wind down activities. So when you have a blackout, a brownout, or whatever terminology quiet period that you want to use where the business cannot do any transactions because we're transferring data from one system to the other, there has to be communications, excuse me, for both the internal side of the business as well as the external. Those are your suppliers, your vendors, so that they know they can't process any more orders in this time period. And the business needs to find a way at how to track the new orders that are being created offline and then being put back into the system. This piece right here, which I'd like to call the wind up and wind down and wind up activities, needs to be very detailed and has to have an owner behind it. Otherwise, you're going to find out pieces of information are missing in that time period. You're going to lose a lot of revenue and you're going to lose a lot of customers because like they're used to it terms of level of service as well as expectations of quality. And that's where cutover can tend to drop the ball, which is around tracking offline pieces as well as the coordination for handoffs and sequencing. And you do that by doing some dry runs.
Got it. So get a little practice in before you finalize it.
That's right.
Right. You mentioned you wanted to talk about two things. So you talked about coordination. What was the second piece?
The coordination was around the dry runs, and the second piece was around wind up, wind down, wind up, which is the handoff or the offline documentation.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So you want to bring both of those to bear when you're doing the cutover. Give it a practice run and then make sure that you've got your workarounds in place.
Exactly. And the communication is key. So a lot with any kind of change management piece is, hey, you're not going to be able to put in your time cards for 2 weeks, so track them offline. You can't put your expenses, so get all your expenses in by this date. Or, hey, suppliers, we're working towards a different system, so here's your alternative way to send your orders, and we will process them by this date.
Right. Yeah, we find just in the employment world, just switching people from one payroll to the next can be disruptive. And so we tend to over communicate quite a bit, especially for folks that are living paycheck to paycheck like a lot of people in the States and around the world do, moving a payday by 6 or 7 days where people have 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks between can be really difficult on them. And scale that up to a larger organization where you've got vendors that are relying on monies that aren't flowing. And I could see where a poor cutoff can cause a lot of problems.
Yes, and that communication piece often gets left out because they're focused on just their internal microcosm, if you will.
Well, that's definitely a good call out for strong change management and some good stakeholder analysis.
Absolutely.
So when you near the end of the process, you call it stabilization. What does that look like in a real world integration? How do you know that you're stable? And I think, Justin, for context on that, I think a lot about the M&A world where we see a lot of things out there where there's a 90-day or 100-day plan. We really like to think by the quarter. Do we really hit stabilization after 90 or 100 days?
I mean, the time period isn't going to be the driver. It's going to be your exit criteria that you define from your strategy point, and as well as all of the system stability and process stability. These are all related to the exit criteria that you have for the various different plans and strategies that you built into place. Um, when you look at stabilization from a business perspective, you've already gotten all the critical defects out of the way, but are you generating the outputs that you are expecting from a KPI perspective, from an SLA perspective, service level agreement, etc.? And the only way to do that is through a monitoring phase. And that monitoring phase, when you reach that threshold that the business agrees, hey, we have the knowledge, we have the systems, we have the processes, all of them are at a point where we can take control of all ownership. And we don't need the external dependency from either a separate team or consultant.
Got it. So this is really, really fantastic information about each of the steps. Can you walk me through an example, Justin, of a post-merger integration and just, touch briefly on the steps and what that might look like for somebody who's looking to up their game?
Sure. So post-merger integration, the deal closure just happened and you're just now getting access to all of the systems. First thing you're going to do is set in some sort of interviews with all of your key stakeholders, key decision makers for what it is, the objectives that they want, as well as who should we start engaging immediately. Start putting some cadences together for weekly meetings and start to build a rubric based off of the deal value hypothesis of what it is that's important. In that same time period, you're also engaging those key stakeholders. Hey, I need these pieces of information. Do you have any existing documentation? And at the same time, you're also building, again, a structured stakeholder list for email distributions as well as for engagement. And then you're also building strategies for hypercare, cutover, testing, and data strategy at the very minimum. If you have a change management component and it's not being handled, or it is being handled by your team, then great. Then you're going to do some communication strategy as well. Then you get down to assessments. You determine what those assessments, the tools, and where you're going to store everything is going to go. Conduct those assessments, as well as identify any of the next layer of people that you need to talk to. Then you go through all of that blueprinting process, get to the point where we're going to do validations. You schedule working sessions and have UAT, systems integration testing, all of the various different kinds of testing and trainings that need to happen. From all of the planning that was done in the strategy point, we then get to getting ready for cutover. That cutover is a very unique piece because it doesn't happen in just one phase. It happens throughout. And so while I'm talking about cutover at this point, you've already done the cutover strategy. You've already done a draft of the plan. You've already reviewed it with the business stakeholders. You've provided a dry run for the lower environment using that cutover plan in order to iterate and find out what those pieces of timeline are and whether things need to change. We then get to the actual cutover. Cutover goes through, you execute, you monitor, and then you get to the point of hypercare. Hypercare, you're executing on the support. You're monitoring the system. People are putting in requests. Hey, I can't do X. I can't access Z. And you're resolving them. You're logging them. And we get to a point where we're now monitoring the business processes, the system stability, and all of that. We then hand off the KT all for the business to be able to run things on their own, and we close the project.
Fantastic. So at any point that starts to go off stage, if it starts to go off track in one of the stages, how do you recommend teams course correct or even know that there's a problem?
Well, the second one I'm going to tackle differently, but should you know that there is a problem, quantify it. Quantify it with empirical data and logical approach. Then you communicate it. You assign an owner a due date to it. If for whatever reason that is not resolved by that time period, you escalate. And you have an escalation prioritization that you build, as well as an escalation path from the strategies that you've put into place as well. So that goes through that process. Now, if you don't know if it's a problem or not, you mark it as a risk and you continuously review it. And you review it based on the impact to the project, as well as the probability that it's going to happen. And you have those periodic reviews towards these risks and be like managing whether an action needs to be taken or we're still going to monitor it and see what we can.
Terrific, Justin. Justin, thank you so much for sharing that overview of the 8 stages of post-merger integration. I think that can be a really, really helpful framework. And of course, we'll link to the article that you wrote in the show notes so folks can go read through that if they'd like. There's some great visuals in there. Justin, other than obviously clicking on that link, how can listeners learn more about you and the work you do?
Thanks, Clint. It was an absolute pleasure to be here on your podcast today. There are actually a few options, 4 to be exact, 3 of which that are on LinkedIn. First, you can always just drop me a connection request. Love to connect with people in the current industry and adjacent fields as well. The second is around taking a look at our LinkedIn company page, Pragintion PM. Pragintion PM is a pragmatic and intentional program and project management services company. There, you will find some curated content around thought leadership and some punchy lessons around complex initiatives. The third and final way that you can connect with me on LinkedIn is to take a look at our global M&A integration network. That is a specialized LinkedIn group around M&A integrations and digital transformation. There, you will find thought leadership around technology, data, business processes, change management, and program and project management. It's a community-driven network that you'll be able to engage with people around in the upstream and downstream elements of an integration. And the third and final way that you can connect is to take a look at our company website, www.pragintionpm.com, TIONPM.com. There you can find all of our detailed methodologies and insights, as well as all details of our services. Finally, you'll be able to book a free consultation there as well. Whichever avenue that you choose in order to connect, I hope that we'll be able to have a detailed conversation, be able to help one another.
Fantastic. And we'll do links to all of those in the show notes. Justin, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate your time.
Clint, have a good day. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.